Elena Volkov woke up to the same cracked ceiling she had been staring at for 3 months. The small apartment in the outskirts of Lviv felt more like a prison than a home these days. She pulled her worn blanket closer and listened to the sounds of her neighbors getting ready for work. At 38, she should have been getting ready too, but the textile factory where she had worked for 15 years had closed down last month. The morning light filtering through her thin curtains reminded her of another day without answers. She walked to the kitchen and made her usual breakfast of black tea and a single piece of bread. The empty chair across from her seemed to grow bigger each day. It had been Victor's chair, where he used to sit every morning before heading to the coal mine. That was 8 months ago, before the accident that changed everything. She picked up the stack of unpaid bills from the kitchen table. The electricity company had already sent 2 warnings. The landlord wanted 3 months of back rent. Her savings, which had never been much to begin with, were completely gone. She had sold Victor's tools, his watch, even her wedding ring. Nothing seemed to make a dent in the growing pile of debt. Her sister Katya had called again yesterday. The conversation played over and over in Elena's mind. Katya lived in Nebraska now, married to a farmer named David, who she had met through an international marriage agency. Her voice had been full of concern and something else: hope. "Elena, you can't keep living like this," Katya had said. "You're wasting away in that apartment. David has friends, good men who are looking for wives, American men who can provide security." Elena had hung up on her then, angry at the suggestion, but as she sat in her empty kitchen, the idea didn't seem as crazy as it had yesterday. She had heard the stories from other women in town. Some had found happiness abroad, others had found disaster, but at least they had tried something different. She walked to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept her important papers. Underneath Victor's death certificate and their marriage license, she found the small mirror she had hidden away. She held it up and looked at herself honestly for the first time in months. Her brown hair had streaks of gray she hadn't noticed before. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper. Her face looked tired, older than her 38 years. "Who would want me?" she whispered to her reflection. The question hung in the air as she got dressed and walked to the market. She needed to buy something for dinner, though her appetite had been poor lately. The market was full of younger women with their children, couples shopping together, families living normal lives. Elena felt invisible among them. At the grocery store, she overheard 2 women talking about someone they knew who had married an American. The woman was 42 and had 3 children. She now lived in Texas and sent money home to her mother every month. Elena listened carefully, pretending to examine the vegetables while absorbing every detail. That evening, she called Katya back. Her sister answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elena began carefully. "And? Tell me more about these agencies. How does it work?" Katya's voice became excited. "Oh, Elena, I'm so glad you're considering this. It's not what people think. These are good men, lonely men who want genuine relationships. They don't want games or drama. They want partners." Elena learned that the process involved creating a profile with photos and personal information. Men from America, Canada, and Australia would browse these profiles and reach out to women they found interesting. If both sides were interested, they would exchange letters and emails. Eventually, if things went well, the man would invite the woman to visit his country. "But Katya, I'm not young anymore. I'm not beautiful like I used to be." "Elena, stop talking like that. You're a good woman. You're kind, hardworking, and loyal. You can cook. You can sew. You know how to take care of a home. These men aren't looking for teenagers. They want women with experience. Women who understand what marriage really means." After the call, Elena spent the night thinking. She made a list of reasons why this was a terrible idea. She was too old. She barely spoke English. She had no money for travel. She knew nothing about American culture. The list filled an entire page. Then she made another list. This one was shorter but somehow more powerful. She was drowning in debt. She had no future in Ukraine. She was completely alone. She had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Elena put on her best dress and walked to the internet cafe downtown. The young man behind the counter helped her navigate to the website Katya had mentioned. Her hands shook as she typed in the web address. The homepage showed smiling couples, success stories of international marriages. Elena read testimonial after testimonial of women who had found love and security abroad. Some were younger than her, but many were in their 30s and 40s. A few were even older. Creating her profile took 3 hours. She struggled with the English translation, using an online dictionary for words she didn't know. She wrote about her life honestly, her work experience, her love of cooking and sewing, her desire for a stable, loving relationship. She mentioned that she was a widow but didn't go into details about Victor's death. The hardest part was choosing photos. She had so few recent pictures. Most of the photos on her phone were from before Victor died, when she was happier and looked healthier. She finally selected 3. One showing her full face with a gentle smile, one of her cooking in the kitchen, and one of her in a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. Before submitting the profile, she read it over 10 times. Every sentence felt like a risk, like she was putting her heart on display for strangers to judge. But she thought about the empty apartment, the unpaid bills, and the long, lonely nights ahead. She clicked Submit. The confirmation message appeared in English. Welcome to International Hearts. Your profile is now live and will be reviewed within 24 hours. Elena walked home in a daze. She had crossed a line she never thought she would cross. She was now officially a mail-order bride candidate, looking for a husband in a foreign country. The shame and hope wrestled in her chest with equal strength. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining men on the other side of the world looking at her photos, reading her words, deciding whether she was worth their time. The vulnerability was almost unbearable. By morning she had received her first message. A man named Robert from Montana had viewed her profile and wanted to know more about her. Elena stared at his message for an hour before finding the courage to open it. His English was simple and direct. He seemed interested in her cooking skills and asked about her family. As she typed her response, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Maybe this crazy idea would work. Maybe there was a future waiting for her somewhere she had never imagined. Maybe being 38 wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. She hit send and waited for whatever would come next. 3 weeks had passed since Elena first contacted Robert, and their daily email exchanges had become the brightest part of her day. She would wake up each morning and rush to the internet cafe, her heart beating fast as she logged into her account. His messages were always there, waiting for her like small gifts. Robert wrote about his ranch in Montana, describing wide-open spaces and mountain views that Elena could barely imagine. He told her about his cattle, his daily routines, and his dream of finding someone to share his life with. His English was simple and honest, making it easy for Elena to understand even with her limited vocabulary. I wake up every morning to the most beautiful sunrise you've ever seen, he had written in his latest message. But it feels empty sharing it with no one. I think you would love it here, Elena. The air is clean and there's so much space to breathe. Elena found herself daydreaming about Montana while she walked through the crowded streets of Lviv. She imagined cooking breakfast in a large kitchen with windows overlooking endless fields. She pictured herself hanging laundry on a line while breathing fresh country air. The fantasy felt so real she could almost smell the grass. Their conversations had moved beyond simple introductions. Robert asked about her cooking, and Elena spent an entire evening describing her grandmother's recipes for borscht and pierogi. He seemed genuinely interested, asking for details about ingredients and cooking methods. In return, he told her about American foods she had never heard of, things like pancakes with maple syrup and something called barbecue. I'm not much of a cook myself, Robert had admitted. I mostly eat simple things. Having someone who could make real home-cooked meals would be like a dream come true. Elena felt useful for the first time in months. She had skills that someone valued. She wasn't just another mouth to feed or another person taking up space. She was someone who could contribute, someone who had something to offer. The photographs they exchanged told their own story. Robert had sent pictures of his ranch house, a simple wooden structure with a large front porch. He looked like a typical American cowboy in his photos, wearing a hat and standing next to his truck. His face was weathered but kind, and his smile seemed genuine. Elena had been more careful with her photos. She selected ones that showed her at her best, smiling in her kitchen, wearing her nicest dress, looking happy and healthy. She avoided any pictures that showed her tiredness or the stress lines that had appeared since Victor's death. After 2 months of daily correspondence, Robert suggested they move their relationship to the next level. He wanted to arrange for Elena to visit Montana. The excitement in his message was clear. "I think we've gotten to know each other well enough through our letters," he wrote. "I'd like to meet you in person and show you my home. If you like it here and if we get along as well in person as we do in writing, maybe we can start planning a future together." Elena barely slept that night. The possibility of actually going to America felt both thrilling and terrifying. She called Katya, who was overjoyed by the news. "This is exactly how it happened with David and me," Katya said. "The letters, the photos, then the visit. Robert sounds like a good man, Elena. This could be your chance for real happiness." Elena began, making preparations for the trip. She applied for a passport and started the complicated process of getting a visa. Robert said he would pay for her plane ticket and all her expenses during the visit. All she needed to do was get the paperwork ready. During this busy time, Elena decided to update her photos. She had lost some weight from stress and poor eating, and she thought she might look better in newer pictures. She went to a photography studio in town and had professional photos taken. The photographer was kind, but when Elena saw the results, her heart sank. The camera had captured things she hadn't noticed in her bathroom mirror. The gray in her hair was more visible under the bright studio lights. The lines around her eyes looked deeper. Her face seemed thinner, more tired. She looked older than she remembered looking just a few months ago. Still, she selected the best photos and sent them to Robert, along with a message expressing her excitement about visiting Montana. She wrote about how she was learning English, phrases, and researching American customs. She told him about her visa application and how grateful she was for his patience with the process. Then she waited for his response. 1 day passed, then 2. By the 3rd day, Elena began to worry. Robert had never gone more than a day without writing back. She checked her email constantly, refreshing the page every few minutes. On the 4th day, the message finally arrived. Elena's hands were shaking as she opened it. The subject line simply said, "I'm sorry." "Dear Elena," the message began. "I have been thinking a lot since receiving your recent photos. I want to be honest with you because you deserve honesty. When I first saw your pictures, I was attracted to you and felt we might have a real connection, but your recent photos show that you look older than I expected. I realize this sounds harsh, but I need to think about my future practically." Elena's heart began to pound as she read the next paragraph. "I'm 45 years old, and I hope to have many active years ahead of me. Ranch life is demanding and physical. I need a partner who can keep up with this lifestyle for many years to come. I'm looking for someone who can help me build a life here, maybe even have children someday. I don't think you're the right match for what I need." The words blurred as tears filled Elena's eyes. She kept reading, hoping the message would somehow get better. "I'm sure you're a wonderful woman and I enjoyed our correspondence. You seem kind and caring, and some man will be very lucky to have you. But I don't think that man is me. I hope you understand and that you find happiness with someone else. I wish you all the best. Robert." Elena sat in the internet cafe and cried. Other customers stared at her, but she couldn't stop the tears from coming. All her dreams of Montana, of fresh air and wide open spaces, of cooking in a sunny kitchen, all of it disappeared in an instant. She walked home in a daze, Robert's words echoing in her mind. "You look older than I expected. I need someone who can keep up. Maybe even have children someday." Each phrase was like a knife cutting into her self-worth. That night, Elena couldn't eat dinner. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than she had since Victor died. At least then, she had been mourning someone who had truly loved her. Now she was mourning the loss of a future with someone who had rejected her for being exactly who she was. The worst part was that Robert was probably right. She was 38. She probably couldn't have children. She was tired and worn down by life. Who was she kidding, thinking she could start over with a younger man in a foreign country? Elena took down the small American flag she had bought to learn about her potential new country. She deleted the English language learning app from her phone. She threw away the notebook where she had been practicing writing her name as Elena Robertson. For the first time since joining the marriage agency, Elena felt like giving up completely. Maybe she was meant to be alone. Maybe 38, really, was too old for second chances. Maybe some dreams were just too big for someone like her. 2 weeks had passed since Robert's rejection, and Elena hadn't left her apartment except to buy bread and milk. She spent her days lying in bed, staring at the wall, wondering if she would ever feel normal again. The marriage agency had sent her several notifications about new messages, but she couldn't bring herself to check them. What was the point? If Robert thought she was too old, other men would think the same thing. Her sister Katya called every few days, trying to encourage her to keep trying. "Elena, you can't give up after one disappointment," she would say. "There are thousands of men on these sites." Robert was just one person with his own specific ideas. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Robert had simply told her the truth that others were too polite to say. She was damaged goods now, a widow, getting older with nothing special to offer. Who would want someone like her when they could choose from hundreds of younger, prettier women? On a rainy Tuesday morning, Elena's neighbor knocked on her door. Mrs. Petrov was an elderly woman who lived alone, and often asked Elena to help her with small tasks. Today she needed help reading a letter from her grandson who lived in Canada. "Elena, dear, you look terrible," Mrs. Petrov said as they sat at Elena's kitchen table. "You're too young to give up on life like this." Elena translated the letter, which was full of good news about the grandson's job and his new apartment. Mrs. Petrov smiled as she listened, her eyes bright with happiness for her family member so far away. "You know," Mrs. Petrov said after Elena finished reading, "my grandson is 35 and still single. His mother worries about him constantly, but I tell her the right person will come at the right time. You can't force these things." Something about the old woman's words made Elena think. Maybe she had been approaching this all wrong. Maybe she was trying too hard to be something she wasn't instead of finding someone who appreciated who she actually was. That evening, Elena finally opened her laptop and checked her messages. Among the notifications were 3 new contacts from men who had viewed her profile. She almost deleted them without reading, but something made her pause. What if one of them was different? The first message was from a 28-year-old who clearly hadn't read her profile carefully. He was looking for someone to have fun with and asked if she liked to party. Elena deleted it immediately. The second was from a 60-year-old man who seemed nice but lived in a remote part of Alaska. His message was polite but focused mainly on how lonely he was and how much he needed someone to take care of him. Elena wasn't sure she was ready to be someone's caretaker again. The third message was different. It came from someone named Thomas Chen, and the subject line read, "Your love of books caught my attention." Elena was confused. She didn't remember mentioning books in her profile. She opened the message and began to read. "Hello, Elena. I hope this message finds you well. I noticed in your profile that you mentioned enjoying quiet evenings and learning new things. I'm a literature professor at a small college in Oregon, and I'm always drawn to people who value learning and personal growth. I'm not sure if you're interested in books, but something about your profile suggested someone who might appreciate deeper conversations." Elena read the message 3 times. Thomas hadn't mentioned her cooking skills or asked about her housekeeping abilities. He hadn't asked for more photos or commented on her appearance. Instead, he seemed interested in her mind. She looked at his profile more carefully. Thomas was 52 years old, a widower whose wife had died from cancer 2 years earlier. His photos showed a gentle-looking man with kind eyes and graying hair. He wasn't traditionally handsome like Robert, but there was something warm and intelligent about his face. His profile was unlike any others Elena had seen. Instead of listing what he wanted in a wife, Thomas wrote about his love of literature, his small vegetable garden, and his quiet life in a college town. He mentioned that he was looking for companionship and intellectual connection, someone to share books and conversations with. Elena spent an hour crafting her response. She told Thomas about the books she had loved as a child, mostly Russian, classics that her grandmother had shared with her. She admitted that she hadn't read much in recent years because life had been difficult, but that she missed the escape that books provided. "I used to love getting lost in stories," she wrote. "When I was young, I would read everything I could find. Pushkin, Tolstoy, even some English books that were translated into Russian. I always dreamed of reading books in their original language someday." She sent the message before she could change her mind. Thomas responded the next day with a long, thoughtful message. He told her about his favorite Russian authors and recommended some English translations she might enjoy. He shared a poem by Robert Frost and asked what she thought about it. He didn't ask for more photos or talk about meeting in person. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her thoughts and opinions. Their correspondence began slowly but grew deeper with each exchange. Thomas would share passages from books he was teaching and ask for Elena's reactions. Elena found herself thinking more carefully about literature than she had in years. She borrowed books from the local library and stayed up late reading so she could discuss them with Thomas. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Tolstoy's female characters," Thomas wrote in one message. "Your observation about how they're trapped by society's expectations but still find ways to maintain their inner strength was brilliant. You have real insight into literature, Elena. Have you ever considered that you might be a natural teacher? Yourself?" No one had ever called Elena brilliant before. Victor had loved her, but he had never been interested in books or deep conversations. Robert had seen her as a potential housekeeper and cook. Thomas seemed to see her as an equal, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. After a month of daily correspondence, Thomas shared more about his personal life. He told Elena about his wife's long illness and how caring for her had changed him. He wasn't looking for someone to replace her, he explained, but for someone to build a new kind of relationship with. "I learned that love isn't just about physical attraction or practical compatibility," he wrote. "It's about finding someone whose mind connects with yours, someone who makes you think differently about the world. Age doesn't matter when you find that kind of connection." Elena read that sentence over and over. Age doesn't matter. The words felt like medicine for a wound she didn't realize was still bleeding. Thomas began sharing photos of his life in Oregon. His house was small but cozy, filled with bookshelves and plants. He sent pictures of his garden where he grew tomatoes and herbs. He showed her the college campus where he taught, with its tree-lined walkways and old brick buildings. But more than the photos, Elena was drawn to Thomas's words. He wrote to her about ideas, about books, about his thoughts on life and loss and hope. He asked her questions that made her think. He seemed to value her opinions and experiences. For the first time since Victor's death, Elena felt like someone saw her as more than just a woman looking for security. Thomas saw her as a person with her own dreams, thoughts, and wisdom. He didn't seem to care that she was 38 or that she had gray in her hair. He cared about who she was inside. One evening, as Elena was reading Thomas's latest message about a novel they were both discussing, she realized something had changed. She wasn't trying to impress him or pretend to be someone she wasn't. She was just being herself, and that seemed to be enough. After 4 months of daily letters and emails, Thomas finally asked the question Elena had been both hoping for and dreading. "Elena, I think it's time we met in person. Would you be willing to visit Oregon? I know it's a big step, but I feel like we've built something special through our correspondence. I'd love to show you my world and see if what we have on paper translates to real life." Elena stared at the message for a long time before responding. The memory of Robert's rejection still stung, but her connection with Thomas felt completely different. Still, meeting in person was terrifying. What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? What if she was disappointed in him? What if they had nothing to talk about face to face? Thomas seemed to understand her fears without her even expressing them. In his next message, he wrote, "I know this might feel scary. Meeting someone you've only known through letters is always uncertain. But Elena, I want you to know that nothing about your appearance could change how I feel about your mind and heart. I've fallen for the person who writes to me about books and dreams and life. That person is who I'm excited to meet." The visa process took 6 weeks. During that time, Thomas sent Elena books about Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. He mailed her a small package containing local coffee and postcards from different places around his town. Each gift came with a note explaining why he thought she'd enjoy it. "This coffee shop is where I grade papers every Saturday morning," he wrote with one postcard. "The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, makes the best apple pie in town. I think you two would get along well. She's from Mexico and has her own story of starting over in a new country." Elena began learning more English, but this time it felt different. Instead of memorizing phrases to impress someone, she was learning so she could better communicate with someone who already cared about her thoughts and feelings. The day of her flight arrived faster than Elena expected. She packed her one suitcase, with her nicest clothes and the few books Thomas had sent her. Katya drove her to the airport, chattering nervously about everything Elena should remember. "Don't try to be perfect," Katya advised as they said goodbye. "Just be yourself." That's who he fell for in the letters. The flight to Portland took 18 hours with 2 connections. Elena barely slept, too nervous and excited to rest. She kept reading Thomas's last email where he described exactly where he would meet her and what he would be wearing. "I'll be holding a small bouquet of flowers. Nothing fancy, just something pretty to welcome you to Oregon. Don't worry if you don't recognize me right away. I'll find you." When Elena's plane finally landed in Portland, her legs were shaky from exhaustion and nerves. She went through customs with her heart pounding, wondering if Thomas would actually be there or if this whole thing was some kind of elaborate joke. She walked into the arrivals area and looked around at all the faces. Families hugging, business people rushing past, taxi drivers holding signs. For a moment, panic set in. What if she couldn't find him? What if he had changed his mind? Then she saw him. Thomas was standing near a coffee shop, holding a small bunch of yellow flowers and looking as nervous as she felt. He was shorter than she had imagined, and his hair was grayer than in his photos, but his eyes were exactly as kind as she had expected. Their eyes met across the busy terminal, and Thomas smiled. It was the same gentle, intelligent smile she had imagined while reading his letters. Elena walked toward him slowly, suddenly aware of every step. "Elena?" he said when she reached him, his voice soft and uncertain. "Yes, it's me," she replied in her carefully practiced English. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Thomas handed her the flowers and said, "Welcome to America. I'm so glad you're here." The drive from Portland to Thomas's college town took 2 hours. Elena sat in the passenger seat of his old Honda, watching the Oregon landscape roll by. Mountains covered with trees, rivers sparkling in the afternoon sun, small towns that looked like postcards. It was more beautiful than any pictures Thomas had sent. They talked carefully at first, both nervous about how different conversation felt in person. But gradually, as they discussed the scenery and Thomas pointed out landmarks, Elena began to relax. His voice was exactly as she had imagined it, calm and thoughtful. "I hope you don't mind," Thomas said as they entered his town, "but I thought we'd have dinner at home tonight. I wasn't sure if you'd be tired from traveling, and I wanted us to have a chance to talk without other people around." Elena was grateful for his thoughtfulness. She was exhausted and overwhelmed by everything being so new and different. Thomas's house was exactly as he had described it, small, cozy, and filled with books. Every wall had bookshelves, and there were stacks of papers on his desk that Elena recognized as student essays from his descriptions. "Let me show you to your room," Thomas said, carrying her suitcase. "I hope you'll be comfortable." The guest bedroom has the best view of the garden. Elena was touched that he had assumed nothing about their sleeping arrangements. After Robert's rejection, she had been worried that men might have expectations she wasn't ready for. Thomas's respect made her feel safe. That first evening, they sat in Thomas's living room drinking tea and talking. Without the delay of email, their conversation flowed more naturally than Elena had expected. Thomas asked about her flight, her first impressions of America, how different everything looked from Ukraine. "Your English is much better than you think," he told her. "I can understand everything you're saying perfectly." Over the next few days, Thomas showed Elena his world. They walked around the college campus, where he introduced her to his colleagues as "my friend Elena, who's visiting from Ukraine." The other professors were warm and welcoming, asking Elena about her country and her impressions of America. They visited the coffee shop Thomas had written about, where Mrs. Rodriguez indeed made amazing apple pie, and immediately adopted Elena like a long-lost daughter. They went to the local library, where Thomas helped Elena get a temporary card so she could borrow books during her visit. "This is my favorite section," Thomas said, leading Elena to the poetry shelves. "I discovered most of my favorite poets right here." Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: intellectual excitement. Being around Thomas and his world of books and ideas made her remember parts of herself she had forgotten existed. The most surprising thing about spending time with Thomas was how comfortable she felt. He never made her feel stupid for not understanding something or awkward about her accent. When she struggled to find the right English word, he waited patiently or helped her find it without making her feel embarrassed. One evening, as they sat on his back porch watching the sunset, Thomas said something that surprised Elena. "You know, Elena, I was nervous about meeting you too. I kept wondering if you'd think I was boring or too quiet. Most people find professors pretty dull." Elena looked at him in amazement. "Thomas, you're the most interesting person I've ever... that... You know about everything, books, history, different countries. How could anyone think you're boring?" Thomas smiled and looked out at his garden. "I guess we both worried about the wrong things." That night, Elena realized something important had happened. She had stopped feeling like she was auditioning for the role of Thomas's wife. Instead, she felt like she was getting to know a friend who might become something more. The pressure was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity about this kind, intelligent man who saw value in her thoughts and dreams. Elena's 2-week visit was supposed to end on a Thursday morning, but as Wednesday evening approached, neither she nor Thomas could bring themselves to talk about her departure. They sat in his living room after dinner, both pretending to read, while stealing glances at each other. Finally, Thomas closed his book and looked at Elena directly. "I don't want you to leave tomorrow," he said quietly. "These past 2 weeks have been the happiest I've been since my wife died. I know that might sound crazy, but I feel like we fit together." Elena's heart raced. She had been thinking the same thing, but was afraid to say it. "I don't want to leave either," she admitted. "But Thomas, we've only known each other for 2 weeks in person. What if we're moving too fast?" Thomas stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his garden where they had spent so many evenings talking. "Elena, I'm 52 years old. I've learned that when something feels right, you don't waste time doubting it. My wife and I dated for 3 years before we got married, and that was right for us then. But this feels different. We've already spent months getting to know each other's hearts and minds through our letters." Elena joined him at the window. The garden looked peaceful in the moonlight, and she could picture herself tending to it alongside Thomas. "But what about practical things? I don't have a job here. I barely speak English well enough for most work. How would we live?" "We'll figure it out together," Thomas said, taking her hand. "You're one of the smartest people I've ever met, Elena. You learn quickly, and you're not afraid of hard work. There are many opportunities here for someone like you." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She walked around Thomas's house in the darkness, touching his books, looking at his photographs, trying to imagine herself living there permanently. Everything felt so different from her cramped apartment in Lviv, but also somehow familiar and comfortable. The next morning, instead of going to the airport, Elena called the airline and changed her ticket to the following week. She needed more time to think, and Thomas needed to consider what he was really asking. During that extra week, they talked seriously about the future. Thomas showed Elena the college's language learning center, where she could improve her English, and maybe even learn to teach Ukrainian to other students. He introduced her to other faculty wives who had come from different countries and could offer advice about adapting to American life. The hardest part for me was learning to drive, laughed Dr. Martinez's wife, Carmen, who had moved from Spain 15 years earlier. But once I got my license, I felt so independent. You'll love the freedom here, Elena. Thomas also took Elena to the town's small business district, where they met with a woman who ran a tailoring shop. I've been looking for someone with real European training, the shop owner said after examining some of Elena's sewing work. The quality of your stitching is beautiful. I could definitely use help, especially with alterations on formal wear. The end of the week, Elena realized that her fears about supporting herself were unfounded. Thomas wasn't asking her to be dependent on him. He was offering her a partnership where they would both contribute to building a life together. On her last evening, Thomas took Elena to his favorite restaurant in town. It was a small Italian place where the owner knew him by name and immediately welcomed Elena like family. "So you're the lady who's been making our professor smile so much," said Antonio, the restaurant owner. "He's been different these past weeks, happier, more relaxed. It's good to see." Over dinner, Thomas pulled out a small box. Elena's breath caught, wondering if he was about to propose. Instead, he opened it to reveal a simple silver necklace with a small book charm. "This isn't an engagement ring," Thomas said with a smile. "I think we should take things one step at a time. But I wanted to give you something to remember these weeks by, whether you decide to stay or go back to Ukraine." Elena touched the small book charm and felt tears in her eyes. It was perfect. Not too much pressure, but a symbol of what they had built together through their love of literature and learning. "Thomas," she said, "I want to stay. I want to try building a life with you. But I'm scared. What if I can't adapt? What if I disappoint you?" Thomas reached across the table and took her hands. "Elena, you could never disappoint me. You've already shown me that you're brave enough to cross an ocean for the possibility of happiness. You're strong enough to start over after losing everything. If you can do those things, you can do anything." 3 months later, Elena stood in the courthouse wearing a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself. Thomas wore his best suit and held a small bouquet of yellow flowers, the same kind he had brought to the airport when they first met. The ceremony was small. Katya had flown in from Nebraska with her husband David. A few of Thomas's colleagues attended along with Mrs. Rodriguez from the coffee shop and Carmen Martinez. It wasn't the big wedding Elena had imagined as a young girl, but it felt perfect for who she was now. "Do you, Elena Volkov, take Thomas Chen to be your husband?" asked the judge. "I do," Elena said clearly, her English now much improved after months of practice. After the ceremony, they had a small reception at Thomas's house, their house now. Elena had spent weeks learning to cook some American dishes, while Thomas had mastered her grandmother's recipe for borscht. The mix of Ukrainian and American foods on the table seemed to represent their new life together. As the evening wound down and their guests went home, Elena and Thomas sat on their back porch, the same place where they had spent so many evenings, getting to know each other. "Do you ever think about Robert?" Thomas asked gently. "About how different your life would have been?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not with sadness anymore. If Robert hadn't rejected me, I never would have been available when your message came. His rejection led me to something much better." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I think about my wife sometimes too, and how she would have liked you. She would have been happy that I found someone who challenges me to think and grow." Elena looked out at the garden where she now spent her mornings before heading to work at the tailoring shop. She had learned to drive just as Carmen had predicted. And Thomas had been right about her quick learning. Her English was now good enough that she had started helping other immigrant women in town with translation and basic conversation practice. "You know what I love most about our story?" Elena said, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "What's that?" "Robert thought I was too old at 38, but you showed me that I wasn't too old. I was just ready for something different. I was ready for real love instead of just security. I was ready for a partner instead of just a provider." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Age is just a number, Elena. Love is about finding someone whose soul fits with yours, and your soul fits with mine perfectly. As they sat together in the Oregon evening, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain of loss, the desperation that had led her to seek love abroad, the crushing rejection that had nearly broken her spirit, and finally, the unexpected discovery that true love wasn't about being young or perfect. It was about being valued for exactly who you are. She was 39 now, happier than she had ever been, and just beginning the best chapter of her life.